Please welcome to the stage, Jimmie Briggs.
Several years ago, I found myself on a stage before an audience for a topic not unlike the one I'll be speaking about today. I stepped out to the spotlight with the prepared remarks etched into my memory, feeling very confident and assured. And then I began my talk. But something happened. When I got to the third line, I froze. So in that moment, I rebounded quickly, I took a deep breath, shrugged my shoulders, and got back in there. I started over again. The same thing happened, I froze again. So now at this point, I'm thinking, I have a count of 0 and 2, this could go either way. If I push forward, I could be the hero. Or if I shirk off the stage, an embarrassment and humiliation, I won't ever forget it. So I take the breath, shrug the shoulders, look up for divine intervention, and start over again. I froze again at the same spot, the third line which I had rehearsed. But this time when I froze, I broke down. Not to sobbing, but into steady tears. I was shaking. Recognizing the crisis I was in, the organizer of the event came up on stage to me, put her arm around my shoulder, hugged me. The audience applauded. The person who had been working with me to rehearse my remarks and help me craft them, he came down as well. The three of us hugged. We sat down and talked through the speech I had intended to give. In that audience, there happened to be a number of journalists and bloggers, and one of them actually wrote about it for the Huffington Post. Now, when I heard that she had written about it, I was a little nervous, a little scared to read it. But once I had, I felt affirmed, I felt seen. Because she'd written the piece not from a place of condemnation or judgment or humiliation, but affirmation, and maybe to a certain degree, inspiration. Whenever I recollect or think about that story, I think about stumbling. When you stumble, you can stumble backwards. Maybe you'll catch yourself. Maybe you'll fall down completely, hit your head, fall on your back, hurt yourself irreparably. When you stumble forward, you have the opportunity to right yourself, to not fall completely to the ground, to maintain momentum. And in that situation, I felt like I was stumbling forward. Today, I'm going to talk to you about stumbling forward or failing forward. Failure is a huge topic. It's something that wraps around the narrative of our entire lives, from the cradle to the grave. So today, I'm going to talk to you about failure through two lenses: failure of relationship and failure of wellness. Now, I knew in childhood, growing up, that I was not going to be one of the heroes or real men, the action stars, like I saw on TV shows or in movies. People like Bruce Willis, Danny Glover, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone. Those guys weren't sensitive or soft. They weren't physically awkward. They weren't uncomfortable being loners or being alone. In other words, they were not me. So I made a decision. If I couldn't be those guys, I just had to embrace who I was. I was the geek, the nerd. I was the guy who, at the basement party in the 80s, was standing against the wall, wearing the not-too-cool clothes, holding up the half-empty cup of watered-down fruit punch. I was the guy who was the last person chosen to be on a team on the playground. I was short, stocky, awkward. I was a nerd, which to those who know me now may not be much of a surprise. So I made a decision, a major decision, as I entered adulthood. The decision I made was to be strategic. People said I could write well, I was a good conversationalist, I knew a little bit about a lot of things, so I became a journalist. For 20 years, I went to places most of you never heard of, know little about, or if you do know something of them, have no desire to go there. And to be honest with you, it was a rush. I loved the action. Once I was in the Palestinian territories, in the West Bank, Ramallah, dodging Israeli gunfire while carrying a wounded Palestinian teenager. In another instance, I was in a neighborhood in Medellin, in Colombia, with a group of voice soldiers who were fighting against rebels during a government-led anti-insurgency operation called Operation Orion. I was also in Rwanda after the genocide, stepping over the remains of countless people, women, men, and children, who were slaughtered in those 3 months in 1984. It was the life I had envisioned for myself. If I couldn't be a hero or action star, in youth or childhood, I was going to create that narrative for myself in adulthood. Going around the world, capturing stories, putting my life on the line, it fed my ego. And as we know, adrenaline and ego go together. But while this real hero, real man fantasy was being realized, another tragedy was happening parallel to that narrative. I was failing my family, my parents, my wife, my daughter, by being away, by traveling, by embracing that lifestyle that would make me feel like a real man, a real hero. I thought that being a documentary journalist, I could have it all. I could be held up or affirmed in my own identity. And I could also be the hero, the man, the parent, the father that I thought I would be when the time came. But I stumbled. I failed. My wife and I separated for about almost a year. And in that time, I had to decide whether I was more attracted or in love with her and being with her, or whether I loved the rush of being in the field. I loved the action, the bang, bang. So after a year, we got back together, we reconciled, we moved back in together. She got pregnant. We had a daughter who will soon be 15. And for the first few months after her birth, I feel like I was embodying that ideal of being a good husband, being a good father. But then I was in New York City when 9/11 happened. And I just felt that call to get back into the field. I felt the call to feel the rush, to be in the action. And so I went to South Asia for a period of time, several months, in fact. Of course, as you can imagine, when I came back home, my marriage fell apart. It was just too much of a strain on my wife, on my family, that I'd chosen the field, chosen the action over my responsibilities. So we got divorced. And I had to learn from that failure. I had to grow from it. I had to stumble forward. So I decided to leave journalism. I felt that if I had any opportunity, any chance of reconnecting with my daughter, who was still quite young then, and actually seeding memories in her of a father who was present, who was invested, who cared, I had to discontinue that life. So I left journalism to start a nonprofit organization that would engage and mobilize young people to stopping gender-based violence, as well as promoting gender equity. I wanted to honor the women and children, the survivors whom I had met in countless journeys, who had shared their stories with me in the hope I would do something with them. Not just recount them, but carry them forward and make their experiences matter. So I felt by starting a nonprofit, I could be the father I always thought I could be or wanted to be, and I could still hold myself up as a real man, an action hero. I could still hold that narrative close, but in a different fashion. So I launched this nonprofit organization with the collaboration of a dedicated, passionate investor group of people, all volunteers, who worked alongside me to realize this vision that I had. In the summer of 2010, in July, in South Africa specifically, we launched this organization during the FIFA World Cup. We brought together young people from 25 countries from around the world for a week-long program for mentorship, training, connection, preparation to go back to their respective countries and start the work of addressing the needs that women who were enduring violence had, as well as holding up this model of new masculinity, new gender inclusion for their peers, who were mainly teenagers. And because of this vision that I made realize with a lot of assistance, because of my ability to speak eloquently about what I had seen as a journalist and recount those stories and use them strategically, that space, the donors, the philanthropists, other organizations, the State Department, the UN, they held me up for it. It was really low-hanging fruit because, I was one of the few men, relatively speaking, who were doing this type of work, who were standing up on behalf of women and with women to promote gender equality and to urge an effort to stop gender-based violence. I was also one of the few men of color, so I stood out in that space. But, as it always happens, ego took over, and I stumbled. GQ magazine gave me an award, gave me their Man of the Year award. My mother flew out from Missouri to be with me in New York. We sat at a table with Demi Moore, Ashton Kutcher, Jimmy Fallon, Nick Cannon came over to me, Chris Brown shook my hand. All these celebrities and stars feted me. They held me up, applauded me on stage when I got my reward, my award and trophy, my watch. And I loved it. I ate it up, soaked it up. But the stumble led to a major failure. Because when I was doing that work of being a gender activist, coming out of journalism to another field of being a hero, being a star, I maintained the lifestyle. I pushed through. When I was tired, I slept very little. When I was sick, I self-medicated. Instead of saying no to some things, I said yes to everything. And that's when it came. A week after the GQ Awards ceremony, one early October morning, I woke up staring at the ceiling from my bed in a hospital room, in an ICU, intensive care unit. My mother was in the corner. She was crying, eyes closed, shaking. My best friend from high school was hovering around the room, softly saying prayers, singing gospel songs. I had a heart attack at 41 years old. No one thought I was going to make it. The doctors didn't think I was going to make it, my friends, my family. They were preparing my mother in the expectation that I was going to die, that she was going to leave there with my body. So I closed my eyes tightly, went inside of myself and fought to live. Drew up all the will I had, all the strength I had to stay alive, to stay here. 3 days later, I was still here. I was alive. In the coming days, the doctors began transitioning me from the ICU to a general hospital ward. The last day I was in ICU, a group of residents came to my room. The chief resident stepped up to the bed, spoke to me and my mother. He said, "Mr. Briggs, we've lowered your blood pressure, we have it under control. Your heart is resuming normal cardiac function, but there's a problem. Your kidneys have failed. We don't think they're going to start back at this point. You're going to need to go on dialysis." That was heavy. That was heavy. Because in my imagining, heroes or action stars, they don't get sick, they don't break down. After the heart attack, after the kidney failure, somehow I knew that I would not be able to live the narrative that I had created for myself. On dialysis, with kidney failure, coming out of a heart attack, I was weak. I could barely go up the subway stairs by myself. On dialysis, after the heart attack, I would ball up on the floor for sometimes up to an hour in pain as my body went through spasms. On dialysis, after the kidney failure and heart attack, I'd pass out sometimes without warning. Once my daughter had to help me get up off the floor, help me to the bed. On dialysis, I was weak. I was less than the vision I had created for myself. But my ego pushed me to get back into the game, to try again, to try to maintain this fantasy I had. And so I went back to work. I went back to the helm of the organization which I had envisioned, first in East Africa, and then realized in South Africa, trying to be the leader that I saw myself as being. And I did go back to work for a time. I went back to the organization. I tried to assume full leadership. But the people who had invested their trust in me, who respected me, who supported me, as they saw that I was being driven by ego, they backed away, they left. They lost their respect, and I faltered as a leader. I stumbled badly. I failed. It was a learning moment. I put my own ego, my own aspirations, my own need for affirmation above the well-being of the organization and above the well-being and visibility of my colleagues in this effort. I've told you about some very intimate, very vulnerable moments of my life. Getting divorced, separating, getting divorced, for a time losing connection with my daughter not long after she was born. I've spoken about having a heart attack and kidney failure and the vulnerability and danger of that. And because of that, I've spoken up to you about failure of leadership. After I failed as a leader, I felt like a phony. I felt like an imposter. I felt like all those accolades and awards and attention I received previously were just an illusion. Why am I talking to you about this today? Some of you in the audience or watching the live stream, like me, may identify yourself as a social entrepreneur, an activist, interrupter, change maker, thought leader. What I found from my failures, from my stumblings, is that when you identify yourself in these ways, it's very easy to see yourself as synonymous with your cause, with the organization which you hold dear. You know, we feel that we're called to do these things. We're called to lead. We're called to this action, we're called to this issue, this organization, which is great. But when you're a leader or you see yourself as above others, as a hero or action star, it's very easy to believe that you can't or shouldn't fail, you shouldn't stumble. You resist it. You won't allow it to happen. But in truth, the greatest moments of success, of growth, happen when you allow yourself to stumble, and to stumble or fail forward. Today, this opportunity is one of the first times I've ever spoken about some of these issues. I've talked about, going off to war. I've talked to a degree about getting sick. But I haven't talked about failure in this way. And I can tell you, for those of us who do work in social entrepreneurship or social activism or thought leadership, these conversations really happen, but they have to. Because we have to believe that in failure, there is the opportunity for change. Telling you this story, I have to be honest, I feel relieved. I feel relieved and feel like I can exhale finally, because I thought that for the longest time, until very recently, failure was something I should be ashamed of, that I had to hide, not talk about, gloss over in my resume and CV. I want to issue a call to you, a call for action to take away from our conversation. When good people, when good ideas aren't allowed to fail, they stagnate, they don't get up, they stumble backwards, and they're damaged. They may never be realized. But when failure is seen as something to expect and accept and embrace, you only increase the opportunity, the likelihood, that from that failure, from that stumbling, you can not only grow to be a better person into a better place, but you have the best possible chance of realizing your dreams and your vision. Thank you very much.